is Le Chant des Oiseaux by Clément Janequin from 1529, and it's one of the earliest examples of a composer trying to accurately capture the essence of birdsong in music, which results in these really unusual lyrics like "Chew chew 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 chew, wheat 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 wheat, Throughout music history, there are countless examples of composers using animals as inspiration for compositions. But a lot of these musical representations, they don't really sound like the animals that they're trying to represent. I mean, the trout from Schubert, it doesn't really sound like a trout. A real trout sounds like this. I'm interested in works where the composer is trying to imitate animal sounds as best they can. And this starts pretty early in music history. This is by Heinrich Ignaz Franz Biber, one of history's most unusual composers, and this is his Sonata Representativa, which is essentially a collage of various musical imitations. Now, these composers were quite limited in the accuracy that they could notate these sorts of sounds, obviously because of the Western music notation system, but this has led a lot of performers these days to play this music quite liberally, which is, I think it's kind of nice. There's also something about chickens. Composers throughout music history seem to enjoy representing chickens. This last example is by Rameau, and the score even explicitly contains "coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq-coq used throughout the entire piece. I guess composers like chickens? Now, it might be obvious, but most of the animals that are represented by composers throughout history are different types of birds. Often a common European bird like the nightingale or the cuckoo, but there is the occasional exception to this. Here's a piece by Alcan called The Cricket. And on the topic of insects, we can't forget the bumblebee. Now, I personally hate this piece of music. I think just because it's been done way too much and everyone's turned it into some sort of absurd party trick. But if you look at the original orchestration by Korsakov, it's actually quite clever. You see, when you get a group of stringed instruments playing really quickly together, it takes on this dirty, grainy sort of sound quality. He then also adds in dynamic swells and accents, and Well, it really does kind of sound like a swarm of bees. And then there's cats. The Italian composer Domenico Scarlatti had a cat named Puccinella, and of course Puccinella would do the most cat thing that a cat can ever do and would regularly walk on the keyboard. And as legend has it, on one of these occasions Scarlatti quickly wrote down one of the ideas played by the cat, which then became the main motive for a fugue. And yes, it doesn't sound like a cat meowing, but this is like the most cat sounding story in the whole world. And of course then there's also the cat duet by Rossini. But I don't really want to talk about that one, it's a little bit too ridiculous. Now obviously I can't cover everything because there is a ton of this sort of repertoire, but when things start to get really interesting is in the 20th century, and the biggest name in animal imitation is Olivier Messiaen. Messiaen was obsessed with birds, and his love of ornithology, it went well beyond just a hobbyist passion. He wrote detailed transcriptions of different bird calls with a precision and a proficiency akin to that of a professional ornithologist, and then later on, this is just ridiculous, he goes and he publishes huge detailed accounts of all of the occurrences of birdsong in his music. It's just bonkers. Now the thing with birds is that their songs are often very high and they're very fast, which makes the songs difficult to perform with acoustic instruments and human performers. And Messiaen, well, he was very aware of this, and so sometimes he tries to notate and orchestrate the birdsong as precisely as he can using high register instruments. But sometimes it's almost as if he transposes the material in such a way as to make a little bit more sense to the human ear. Check this out. This is the beginning of Oiseau Exotique, and no, he's not trying to imitate a pterodactyl. The bird that Messiaen is imitating is supposed to be a minette en tout, otherwise known as a common hill miner, and it probably sounded a little something like this. Now first you might think, okay, that's nice, but it doesn't sound anything like this. But if we speed it up a little bit, now it's beginning to sound a bit more like a bird. It's almost as if birds and humans have different perceptions of time, and Messiaen is stretching the time proportions so that we might better appreciate the musical qualities of the birdsong. And this is one of the beauties of modern music. The composer has significantly more compositional, conceptual, and notation techniques available with which to more accurately represent some of these complex sounds, which leads me to this. This is a work by the German composer Carola Bauckholt, and as the name implies, it's inspired by migratory birds, and it requires the performers to directly imitate bird sounds that are provided on a CD accompanying the score. Essentially, the notation in the score is there for orientation, and the performers, they should be imitating the bird sounds from the CD as best they can. This one's for solo violin and playback, and as you can probably hear, there's a sort of dialogue between the pre-recorded bird sound and the violin, and as a result, the bird sounds begin to sound more musical, and the violin begins to sound more like a bird. But what's a little bit nuts about this piece is the amplification. Transducers are placed on 4 violins and 1 viola that are then hung around the room. In other words, these violins become the loudspeakers. You are literally hearing the bird sounds projected from a violin. It's such a cool idea. It's a very organic way of bringing the bird and the violin sounds together, which is a very difficult thing to do. If you find this sort of thing fascinating, I highly recommend you go and check some of it out for yourself. It's all available online. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of this repertoire, so I can't cover everything, but if you have some interesting examples that you would like to share, please leave them in the comments. I love discovering new repertoire by reading the comments section. Catch you in the next one. Bye.